Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, sometimes nicknamed the Milwaukee Cannibal, was an American necrophilic, hepaphilic, and cannibalistic serial killer, serial rapist, and poisoner. Welcome to our channel. In today's video, we're going over the life of Jeffrey Dahmer. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Background: Dahmer was born in West Allis, Wisconsin on May 21, 1960. His parents were Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a chemical analyst, and Joyce Dahmer. 7 years later, his brother David was born. By all accounts, Jeffrey had a normal childhood, though his parents' marriage is said to have been tense and he was often left to himself since they were often busy with work. He became very mellowed after he was operated on for a double hernia when he was 6 years old. It's also been claimed that he was molested by a neighbor. As he got older, he grew increasingly introverted, and began spending time at a secret animal cemetery he had built himself and filled with roadkill, the centerpiece of which was a dog's head he had placed on a stake. He began drinking in his teens and was a full-blown alcoholic by high school in 1977. His parents divorced and he very briefly attended Ohio State University before dropping out due to his drinking, murders, arrest, trial, incarceration, and death. On June 6, 1978, Dahmer committed his first murder. While living alone in the family home, Dahmer invited an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks for drinks. After several hours of drinking, Hicks wanted to leave and Dahmer did not want him to. When he tried to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned and strangled him to death with a barbell and buried the body near his pet cemetery. Sometime after that, Dahmer's father compelled him to join the army, where he rated average. He was trained as a medic and deployed to West Germany, but was honorably discharged in 1981 due to his alcoholism. When this happened, he was provided by the army with an airplane ticket to anywhere in the country, which he used to go to Miami Beach, Florida. He spent most of his time there at a hospital but was eventually kicked out because of his drinking. He continued doing so when he came home, eventually being arrested for drunken disorderly conduct later in 1981. In 1982, Dahmer moved in with his grandmother in West Dallas. While he lived there, she found on different occasions a fully dressed male mannequin stolen from a store and a .357 Magnum gun in his room. She also noticed terrible smells coming from the basement, to which Dahmer had brought a dead squirrel and tried to dissolve it in chemicals. He was also arrested for indecent exposure in 1982. In 1986, the second time he masturbated in front of 2 boys. In the summer of 1988, Dahmer's grandmother asked him to move out because of his strange behavior and the smell coming from the basement, prompting him to move into an apartment in Milwaukee closer to his job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. The same year, he was arrested for drugging and sexually fondling a 13-year-old boy. He was sentenced to 5 years probation and 1 year in a work release camp, moving out of his apartment. He was paroled 2 months early and moved into another Milwaukee apartment to 13 of the Oxford Apartments complex on May 27, and intended victim contracts and for some phone. By coincidence, the younger brother of the boy who drugged him molested years earlier escaped after having been drugged and raped by him. Dahmer later claimed that he also drilled into his head. When the police arrived, he claimed contract to be his 19-year-old lover, and that he had left after they had gotten drunk and argued. Since he was so charming and articulate, the police believed him and didn't look into the boy's real age or the fact that Dahmer was a registered sex offender on probation, intoxicated Asian naked male. Sober boyfriend. He was arrested for the last time on July 22, 1991. When an intended victim, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and call for police. When he led 2 officers to the apartment, they arrested Dahmer and uncovered several grisly items in the apartment, such as photographs of mangled bodies for skulls in the refrigerator, several dismembered organs and bodies, blue barrel vats containing whole bodies, neatly wrapped strips of human flesh in the refrigerator, and a barrel can and in 3 human torsos. Dahmer was charged with 15 of the murders and sentenced to 957 years in prison. He served this time at the Columbia Correctional Facility in Portage, Wisconsin, where he eventually declared himself a born-again Christian. On November 28, 1994, he and a fellow inmate, Jesse Anderson, were beaten in the prison gym with a dumbbell by Christopher Carver, another inmate, and he died on his way to the hospital. Anderson also died from his injuries. Dahmer's brain was retained for study, and the apartment complex where he had lived has been demolished and is now a vacant lot. In January 2007, evidence emerged potentially linking Dahmer to the 1981 murder of Adam Walsh, who was fixated somehow and his head severed. The killing took place in Hollywood, Florida at the time Dahmer lived in Miami Beach. Two eyewitnesses could place Dahmer in the mall where Walsh was last seen on the day of the abduction. And Dahmer later made a habit of cutting off the heads of his victims. In the end, the late serial killer artist's tool who confessed to the murder but was never convicted for it was officially named the killer. In 2012, Dahmer's high school friend John Derfechter published his own graphic novel titled My Friend Dahmer, which covered Derf's social relationship with Dahmer and Dahmer's household dynamic during their high school years, well before Dahmer's killings. The comic was later adapted into a film production of the same name in 2017, with Ross Lynch starring titularly as teenage Dahmer and Alex Wolff playing a teenage Derf. Modus operandi. Dahmer would visit gay bars, gay libraries, and the local mall, or walk the streets looking for victims and invite them to his apartment to have sex or drink while watching pornography, or lured them by offering them money to pose for some photos. While looking for potential victims and as part of his fantasy of feeling powerful, he would wear yellow contact lenses so his eye color would match that of Emperor Palpatine from Return of the Jedi and James Vanneman from The Exorcist 3. All of the victims were aged in their mid-teens to mid-30s, a majority of them being bi or homosexual, of African or Asian descent, and lived high-risk lifestyles. A lot of them also had criminal records, often for serious crimes such as arson, rape, battery, and sexual assault. After picking them up, usually on Friday nights so he could spend the weekend with them, he would bring them home and drug them by crushing prescription drugs and blending it with their drinks. Afterward, you would usually rape them, murder them by strangling them with his bare hands or with a leather strap, and dismember the remains in his bathtub while documenting the processes with a Polaroid camera simultaneously. He would then remove the organs from his victims' chest, de-icing the ones who did not wish to keep into pieces. Suspend the torsos to allow the blood to drain in the bathtub due to so much of it pooling in his victims' chests after he killed them, and removed the flesh from the body with a knife. Prior to dismembering the victims he killed when he lived in the Oxford apartment complex, he would pose his victims' bodies in suggested positions, usually with the chest thrusted outwards. In the case of Ernest Miller, he slashed his throat with the same knife he used to dismember, dissect, decapitate, and flay his victims, since he didn't have enough pills to drug and incapacitate him. During his later murders, he experimented with handcuffing them and revealing his intentions before the drugs completely kicked in order to torture them. When he killed his first victim, Stephen Hicks, he bludgeoned him with a barbell and then fatally strangled him with it. He then dismembered his body with a carving knife, removed the flesh off his bones, and smashed them with a sledgehammer, spreading the pieces all over his backyard afterward. His second victim, Stephen Twomey, was beaten to death while the former was in a drunken state. He would also engage in sexual acts with the bodies, pose and take pictures of them, and eventually dispose of their flesh by dissolving them in chemicals to the point that they were completely liquefied and could be poured down a toilet or sink. He would also keep several body parts in his apartment, usually the heads and genitals, even preserving whole bodies and large chemical-filled vats. He eventually attempted to turn some of them into zombies by drilling large holes in their skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling hot water into their temporal lobes using large syringes, which would prove to be fatal for contract Cynthia Simphone and Jeremiah Weinberger. The heads, with which he had a particular fascination, were often boiled until the flesh came off, preserved with Soilex, a laundry detergent mixed with water and bleach solutions, and painted to make them look like they were made of plastic. He would also consume many of his victims, eating parts of them, such as their hearts, livers, and biceps. During the entire process of his MO, he would drink alcohol. Dahmer's murders were motivated by powerful abandonment issues rooted in his fear of rejection and a loss and need for control. The murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, is very exemplary of this. He was killed because he wanted to leave, causing Dahmer to snap and kill him in order to keep him from abandoning him. He took a kind of sadistic delight in luring them. The cannibalism he practiced, consuming his victims to make them a part of himself, was an extension of his need for power.